This is a very familiar story for most of us. I think I've heard it when I was a kid in my school, and was one of my favorite stories about giving thanks. And this is a Thanksgiving season. I'm sure for some of us this is new if we were not born in this country. For those who were born in this country, this is a big deal where entire families get together and celebrate the Thanksgiving meal. This is probably one day they say all family feuds and disputes are kind of forgotten. People try to get along, But what happens is after Thanksgiving, Thursday comes Black Friday. I don't know why they named it Black Friday, but I was just checking out some news, and I think Business Insider came up with saying this was a record-breaking Black Friday, where people spent $3 billion from just their phones. And total sales for Black Friday came to 27 billion US dollars. Now, just to put that in perspective, that's greater than the GDP of several Central American nations, like Honduras is 21, El Salvador is 27, and Europe, Iceland is just $19 billion, and in Asia, Nepal is $21 billion. So people spend more on just one day than the GDP of entire nations. And maybe that's why it's called Black Friday, I don't know. But you see that after a feeling of thanks comes this feeling of want, and I just thought it's a very interesting trivia for this Thanksgiving season that I just throw it out. I was fascinated by it. And I was thinking, as Christians, what do we understand and make sense of Thanksgiving? Whether we were born here or not born here. And this is a passage that's very simple. It's a story. It happened in Jesus meeting the 10 lepers and healing them, and one of them coming back to say thank you. But behind the simple story are some profound truths that I want to share this morning about how our thankfulness can be authentic. And its story begins with Jesus moving from Galilee to Jerusalem. And always, he seems to go to the most neglected places and the most neglected people. And he crosses the boundary of Galilee and enters into Samaria. And outskirts of Samaria are lepers. I'm sure many of you have seen people who have been affected with leprosy. I've seen them when I was a kid. They used to stand right outside my church. So when I walk out of church, they will be there begging for alms. And I remember standing at a distance and putting it to them because I was always kind of not very comfortable to get too close to them. Because the way they look is sometimes scary as a child. But leprosy is a disease that's very lethal, in the sense what it does is normally when we are sick, we feel pain. Leprosy does the opposite. It anesthetizes your body and your extremities so that people don't feel pain. They can actually take, hot potatoes right from the fire without even feeling burned. So because of this, a lot of people who have leprosy have their bodies severely deformed. And also what it does is it absorbs the fingers and toes because it eats the bone marrow, so people lose their limbs. And sometimes it even goes to the eye, and people can become blind as a result of leprosy. And it knocks off people's teeth, so they lose their teeth. And it goes into the larynx and affects their vocal cords, so you cannot speak. So if you're someone who has leprosy, imagine this. You don't have feelings. You mostly end up blind. You can't eat good food because you've lost your teeth. And the worst part, you cannot speak, or your voice gets so coarse. And Luke is a doctor who is writing this. And so every phrase he uses is significant. And he says, when the lepers stood up, lifted up their voices. It takes a lot of effort if you have leprosy to really speak and call out to Jesus. And he says he calls out to Jesus. And not just the physical pain and the deformities are something that characterize lepers. If you have leprosy, there are social ramifications. You cannot live a normal social life. So they are sent out away from the cities, and that's why you see they are living in the outskirts. I don't know about here in the United States, but in India, even now, There are 1,000 leper colonies all over India where people are made to live. In my hometown of Chennai, where I grew up, there are several leper colonies, and one of Jemima's uncles, he's been ministering to them for the past 20 years. And he says the greatest thing people with leprosy value is not money, is not gifts, it's relationship. So he actually goes into their house, sits with them, dines with them, probably only one non-leprous person who has made a friendship with them, and I really admire him. He's a very ordinary guy, not famous, you won't see him on any YouTube channels, but has a heart for these people, because when you're socially neglected, when we are sick, normally if people don't respond, we feel bad, but imagine this. You can't see, you can't talk, you can't feel, and on top of this pain, it's the social trauma that no one wants to have a relationship with you. And so they form a community among themselves, and they are standing out, and here's Jesus walking in. And it takes a great effort, and they cry out, "Lord Jesus, have mercy on me." It's when we are usually pushed to experience crisis in our lives that we seek after God, isn't it? Especially in the Bay Area, when we have a pretty nice living, we don't by default live a life that is thankful. And most of the times, if we are honest to ourselves, when is it that we really think about God? It's only when we get physically sick, perhaps, right? Or something happens to our loved ones, or if there is a crisis in our marriage, our relationships, or with our children, or our friends, or at school, or if there's some issues at work, like layoffs that are looming, or being not rewarded, or it's only these discomforts that really make us to go to Christ, just like these lepers had no one else but run to him. But there are three things I want to point out today about what authentic thankfulness looks like from God's perspective. So what happens when he comes to Jesus? He says in verse 15 is, then one of them, when he saw he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. Because Jesus tells them in verse 14, go and show yourselves to the priests, and as they went, they were cleansed. Now what happens here is, when they meet Jesus, he restores the whole person for these people. So Christ heals at three levels for them. Firstly, he heals them physically. He even does it to people who don't acknowledge who he really is, because that's how gracious God is. Secondly, he heals them from their social isolation. He says, go show yourself to the high priest. Because if you had leprosy, you were not even allowed to enter the temple, not even the city and even the temple. So your isolation was not just social but spiritual. They couldn't have access to God. And Jesus breaks those barriers. He revives and restores that. And finally, we hear in the last case of the one person who comes back in verse 19, he says to them, rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. And the word well here doesn't refer to just physically you're okay, because already he was okay. What he's talking of being well is, well, you have been spiritually restored. So there is a threefold restoration that happens when these guys go to Jesus. And especially for this one person who came back, he had complete transformation of all aspects of himself. And that leads us to our first point. Authentic thankfulness proceeds out of a transformed self. Only changed people can show thanks. Otherwise, our thankfulness will be very superficial. I'll thank you because you do something that I want, and I'll expect that someday you will return the favor. That's how human thankfulness works, but authentic, real thankfulness can only come from someone who has been totally restored or transformed. And Tim Keller has this quote. He says, it's one thing to be grateful, it's another to give thanks. Gratitude is what you feel. Thanksgiving is what you do. The reason why we want someone to thank us, the reason why we give gifts, We want to show how much we love others, and we're delighted when they say thank you, right? Meaningfully, by appreciating us. We've been teaching Brian and Sophia to say thank you and welcome, I'm sure, like we all do for little children. And we use some storybooks, and one of them is about, when we give them something and they don't say thank you, we ask them, hey, where are your manners? And then they'll say thank you. And then we turn around and suddenly we hear there's some dialogue going on between them, and Brian shares his gift with Sophia, and she takes it and walks away. And he stops and turns to her and says, manners. And she says, oh, thank you. So at a young age, we somehow get it dialed in that we want people to thank us when we do something nice to them, right? And how much more it is with God in terms of being thankful. The reason is that when we give thanks, it involves seeking the giver than the gifts. Authentic thankfulness involves seeking the giver than the gifts. I mean, that's what Jesus is expecting here, and that's what God is expecting. He blesses us with so many things. And yeah, we are thankful to Him, but are we thankful for the gifts, or are we thankful for the gift giver, who is Jesus Christ Himself? Because if we are thankful for the gifts, then we will be like these 9 people who just say, oh, yeah, great, I'm healed, thank you, and just continue on with our life as though nothing ever happened. But if we are thankful for the giver, then we want to go back to Him rather than stay in enjoying the gifts. And that's exactly what He does. It says that when He was healed, one of them, He turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving Him thanks. And then he throws a twist to his hearers. By the way, he was a Samaritan. He was someone who didn't have this history of Christianity all his life, but here was someone who got it. He did these 3 things. He turned back. Do we stop at giving thanks and just keep enjoying the gifts? Or does that really move us to go back to the gift giver to deepen our relationship with Him? That's authentic thankfulness. Authentic thankfulness is not just saying thank you. Authentic thankfulness is taking our relationship with God to the next level, seeing how He is blessing us in so many ways. That's authentic thankfulness. And it's not just restoring and taking our relationship even closer. Out of that comes praise. And that's what we see Him doing, praising God with a loud voice. He was oblivious to what other people would think about Him. And finally, when we take our relationship with God to a next level, seeing how He has so much blessed us, what authentic thankfulness does is, it ends in worship. Authentic thankfulness ends in worship. Does our thankfulness just stop with just saying a thank you, a broad brush, generic thank you to God for all your blessings? Or does it take us into enjoying Him more, knowing Him more, and worshiping Him more? Authentic thankfulness involves seeking the giver than the gifts. And then lastly, we're going to see what authentic thankfulness is all about. But very strangely here, we see that in this passage, Jesus just says one sentence to all of them to get healed. But then He goes on a barrage of 3 questions when He sees people haven't come back. Why is it that people sometimes tend to be not so thankful? What is the root cause for unthankfulness? Have you ever thought about that? Or let's take it at a very personal level, right? Why is it that we sometimes don't thank people? Perhaps we feel we don't owe them that. Or perhaps we don't want to give them credit for that. Or perhaps we believe we had a role to play in that, so I don't have to thank this person for this. Or if we flip it, why is it we get offended when someone does not thank us? We feel probably they don't appreciate or care about us or love us, right? Even at our own level, we have that. So Jesus is now obviously very concerned. He's asking three questions. The first is a very factual question. It says, hey, were not 10 cleansed? It anticipates an affirmative answer. Yes, 10 people were cleansed. And then he says, where are the 9? That's an interrogative question, and there's only a silent response because they are not here. And thirdly, his question is an evaluative question, and it is a key question that unlocks the reason for unthankfulness in our lives. He says, was no one found to return and give praise to God except this one person? If Jesus was asking this question, then there is a real significance to this question. Of all these three questions, the last question is the most significant because it's an evaluative question. Jesus is trying to measure something here. He's not just merely asking, hey, why did they not say thank you to me? He's trying to go behind that and see what's missing here. Why is it these guys haven't been able to give thanks? Not giving thanks is a reflection of our spirituality according to Jesus. You know, authentic thankfulness is a true measure of our spirituality. And when you don't thank God for something that you experience in your life, it's not just an issue. It reflects a deeper inner reality, and it actually affects us. And I'm going to show us how. When we are really not thankful, it means that we are not content with what we have. And that is not just a status quo thing. You know, if you look back in the Old Testament, in Exodus chapter 32, we see Israelites are at a point where they have been the most blessed nation among all nations. God shows up in a big way, takes them out of Egypt in the most dramatic manner possible, destroying the entire Egyptian army, walks them through the Nile, splitting the Red Sea. And then every day, he's covering them with a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day, and giving them manna that's just enough for their daily bread. Imagine that. How much more bountiful can your life be than experiencing all these blessings, and the Shekinah glory of God was right in their midst? But there was just one moment when Moses walks away to spend time with God, and in that absence, rather than becoming thankful, they switch to creating an idol for themselves. And they say, create an idol, I want to worship it. You know, when we are not thankful, our lives get deeply impacted. Our lives are not just going to go on the same node. We will start entering into idolatry. If you read Romans chapter 1, verse 21 to 23, it says, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. When we are not thankful to God, it's indicative of a deeper discontentment within us. And it will affect us to fill that discontentment with something that's not true or noble or honorable and becomes an idol. Now, 1 Thessalonians 5:18, we are commanded to be thankful always, in every aspect, in every sphere of our lives. But when we are not thankful, we drift away into things that affect us. If we are not thankful for the spouse that God has given us in marriage, we are going to start seeking after that missed intimacy in something else, whether it's through images online or other relationships. If we are not thankful for the friends and family and parents God has blessed us with, we feel our parents are not good enough, we are going to seek validation in other things and make that an idol and pursue that and live for that. If you're not thankful for who we are, how God has made us to be, our gifts, our abilities, we'll be constantly trying to be someone else to please, end up being unauthentic about who we are. And we will not be able to trust that God has given us the best. And we let go of that seeking other things other than Him. In short, authentic thankfulness is a measure of our spirituality. Are we thankful really for everything God has blessed us with in our lives? However imperfect they may be. Maybe you may say, oh, you don't know about my wife or my husband. You don't know how horrible they are on this side. But God has given them for a purpose, because God's ultimate desire is not to fill us with gifts so we can be made happy. God's ultimate desire is to give us exactly what we need so He can prepare us for a life of eternity reflecting His holiness. And therefore, even if our marriages are not great, even if our children are not great, even if our job situation is not great, are we able to trust that God is sovereign and huge and big, and He's going to work all these things for the good of me because He loves me? And if I don't have that trust and faith in Him, I'm going to be filling these gaps that I think I have in my life with other things. And it will impact my marriage. It will impact my relationship in my family with my parents or children. It will impact my work and how I view my work. And there will be an idol that I would have erected in the secret crevices of my heart that I'm always thinking about, because I turn to that to give me pleasure than to God, my Creator, who has given me everything that I can be thankful for. Authentic thankfulness is a true measure of our spirituality. So this Thanksgiving, rather than just saying thanks to God for all the blessings He has blessed us with and others, let's ask ourselves, are there some things in my life that I'm really not thankful for? That I'm constantly complaining about? I wish this were better. I wish I had a better job. I wish my spouse was better. I wish my kids were more obedient. I wish my parents were more understanding. I wish my friends were more accepting. If that's the case, maybe it's time that we stop looking at the gifts and start looking more at the giver of the gift, who is Christ, because He will not disappoint us. In Him are all the riches and all the glory that are always there, that will always satisfy us and affirm us and prepare us for a life of eternity to live in holiness. And as people who get that, if we get that, then we will stop thinking more about ourselves and start thinking more about others. To see, hey, how can we make a difference in someone's life, and probably is not having a great Thanksgiving this time. And that's what I want to encourage all of us to do in this Thanksgiving. Think of just as one person, a friend or a co-worker or whoever you think may be hurting, and call them and thank them and text them or whatever it is to encourage them. That's a better way to show thanks, because we are truly thankful. We are filled, we are blessed in every abundant way. Because we draw our satisfaction not from the gifts, but from the giver of the gifts. You know, the Black Friday sales, I was looking at what are the most sold items that were, went in big quantities. And you probably would have guessed the most sold items in Thanksgiving were iPads, MacBook Airs, 4K TVs, Nerf guns, electric scooters. These were the most sold items, right? But the most needed items for people are words of love, encouragement, being there when they are going through a tough time, our prayers. And I think as Christians, people who have been satisfied by an awesome, glorious God, we can be that agent to do that to others. If our thankfulness is authentic and it comes not from the things God has blessed us with, but from the giver of the gifts, Christ Jesus himself, who gave himself up on the cross for us. Shall we pray?